There are moments, quiet, almost embarrassed to be noticed, when life leans in and tries to tell you something. Not with thunder, not with bright revelations, but with the strange weight that settles in your chest when you wake before dawn and sense, without knowing why, that something is shifting under the surface. Most people brush it aside, chalking it up to bad sleep, stress, or the mind's usual mischief. Yet if you linger in that half-light long enough, you may feel the faintest tug inside you, the first ripple of a tide that has already begun to turn. It would be convenient if the big changes arrived with warning labels, if the universe mailed you a letter stamped with urgent on the envelope. But life rarely announces its intentions. Instead, it leaves scattered hints, small hesitations, passing thoughts, coincidences that drift through your day like unfamiliar birds. And you, being human and busy, often miss every single one. Not from failure, not from ignorance, but simply because your attention is elsewhere, occupied with the endless list of things you've convinced yourself must be done before you're allowed to breathe. But the truth is this: before anything meaningful shifts, you always feel it first. Not in the events, but in the atmosphere around them. There's a subtle disorientation, a sense that something unseen is rearranging itself behind the scenes. You may even notice yourself pausing mid-stride or staring longer than usual at something ordinary. Your mind tries to explain it away, but your deeper self, the one that hears what logic can't, recognizes the whisper. The whisper isn't there to frighten you. It isn't a warning of disaster. It's the soft tap on the shoulder that comes before every transformation. The quiet confirmation that the world is moving you toward a new chapter even before you know its name. And if you listen carefully, you may notice that the whisper has a texture to it. Light as breath, gentle as dusk settling on a windowsill. It doesn't push, it invites. This is the beginning, and beginnings rarely look like beginnings. They look like restlessness, like questions you can't quite articulate, like feeling lost without knowing what you're searching for. They look like life preparing you for a change you can sense but cannot yet see. And somewhere in the midst of this subtle rearranging, a small, patient voice is waiting for you to turn your head and finally hear it. Long before any true transformation arrives, the first sign shows up as discomfort. Not the dramatic kind, no storms breaking overhead, no lightning splitting the sky, but a quieter, stranger sensation. A restlessness that moves through you without introducing itself. It can feel like an itch in the soul, a gentle dissonance between the life you are living and the life that is already forming beyond your understanding. Most people call it anxiety. Others label it exhaustion. But beneath those names lies something new and more honest. The beginning of inner transformation. It starts subtly. A familiar routine that once felt stable begins to feel tight around the edges, as though life has grown a size and your habits haven't kept up. You may catch yourself staring out a window longer than usual or feeling oddly impatient with things that never bothered you before. There is no catastrophe, no clear event to blame, just a faint but persistent sense that something is shifting inside you. This is the seed cracking open. And like any seed, it feels the pressure before it feels the light. Of course, discomfort is not what people expect as a spiritual sign. We prefer revelations to arrive wrapped in clarity. But life, in its particular humor, prefers ambiguity. It shakes the branches before it delivers the fruit. And so the unease grows, not enough to overwhelm you, but enough to keep you paying attention. Something in you begins asking questions you don't remember inviting in. Why does everything feel slightly mismatched? Why does the familiar no longer fit the way it used to? How do I know if something is a sign or simply stress? Fear of the unknown rises here, as it always does. Not because the future is dangerous, but because stepping into a new chapter requires releasing the illusion of control. You may feel the pull to cling to what you know, even if it no longer feels true. But transformation is patient. It knows that discomfort softens your grip just enough for change to slip in. In this uneasy space, this storm before transformation, you are being prepared. Not punished, not overwhelmed, prepared. The feeling of misalignment is the threshold. The tension in your chest is the invitation. And the uncertainty you keep trying to outrun is simply life rearranging itself in your favor, long before you recognize the shape it's taking. It's a peculiar thing how life tries to speak to people, not because the messages are difficult to read, but because the mind is rarely quiet enough to notice them. Most people live inside a kind of permanent weather system, a storm of thoughts, obligations, unfinished conversations, and imaginary disasters. They wake with noise already humming in their heads and fall asleep with the same noise still unresolved. In that constant clamor, even the clearest whisper from the universe sounds like nothing more than wind brushing past the window. If you were to watch a day unfold from above, you'd see how often the signs try to slip in. A moment of hesitation before saying yes. A sudden intuition tugging you toward a different street. A sentence overheard that answers a question you never said aloud. Tiny nudges everywhere, like small hands gently guiding your shoulders. But people brush past them, distracted by schedules and worries and the belief that life's important messages must arrive with some kind of cosmic drum roll, as if meaning only counts when it feels dramatic. The truth is gentler and more ironic. The signs aren't hiding. You are simply elsewhere. Lost in the past you keep replaying, or the future you keep rehearsing. Meanwhile, the present, where every sign actually lives, waits patiently like a friend tapping the table while you stare at your phone. You're not failing to perceive the universe. You're just a little overbooked. Even so, there comes a moment, usually small, usually quiet, when a person realizes they've been missing something. A strange sense of familiarity in a coincidence. A feeling that a message has passed by just inches from recognition. That moment is tender. It's the first time the mind softens enough for awareness to slip through. And if this is sounding a little too familiar, consider tapping the like button, not as an obligation, but as a way of letting these reminders find the people who might need them. A gentle signal that maybe, just maybe, you recognize yourself somewhere in these words. Because the signs don't hide. They never have. You simply haven't been looking in the direction where they shine the brightest. And once you do, once you finally turn your attention toward the quiet, you'll begin to notice how much has been speaking to you all along, which leads inevitably to the moment in every life when a whisper becomes too aligned, too repeated, too strangely timed to ignore. Every now and then, life offers a quiet example. Someone whose days look ordinary enough on the surface, yet something unspoken stirs beneath them. Elena was one of those people. She lived in a small apartment above a bakery on the corner of Maple and 3rd, the kind that always smelled faintly of sugar and coffee. She worked as a project coordinator at a local marketing agency, her calendar packed with client calls, status updates, and color-coded deadlines. Her phone buzzed constantly. Her mind rarely stopped. She had friends, weekend plans, a gym membership she used just enough to feel responsible. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. Just a familiar rhythm she could follow half asleep. The 7:10 train into the city, the same oat milk latte from the cafe by the station, the same elevator ride to the 11th floor, the same jokes in the break room with the same three people. Stability, she believed, was the closest thing to safety. But life has a way of loosening what we grip too tightly. For Elena, it started almost imperceptibly. Small disruptions, easy to ignore. A client she'd worked with for years abruptly canceled a long-term contract. The 7:10 train that was always on time broke down 2 mornings in a row, leaving her stranded on the platform under a flickering light. A sudden wave of irritability washed over her during a meeting she used to enjoy. Her manager was talking, her colleagues were nodding, and she felt an inexplicable urge to walk out of the room. No catastrophe, no obvious crisis, just hairline fractures in the smooth glass of her daily routine. She shrugged them off, blamed deadlines, hormones, the gloomy weather, Mercury retrograde, anything convenient enough to let her keep moving without looking too closely at what was shifting underneath. Yet the disruptions didn't stop. They grew more pointed, more precise. One afternoon on the train home, she overheard a stranger say, "You already know, you're just afraid to admit it." And the words landed in her chest with the uncanny accuracy of an arrow finding its mark. Another evening, while cleaning her overstuffed bookshelf, a worn paperback slipped free and fell open at a line she'd underlined years earlier. "The life you want will cost you the life you're used to." Later that week, the same number at 11:11 kept appearing on her phone, on a receipt, on a billboard near her office. A white feather turned up on the seat beside her at the bus stop, then again in the hallway outside her apartment. It was as if reality were clearing its throat, trying politely, then not so politely, to get her attention. Still, she resisted. People often do. She told herself it was coincidence, the mind making patterns out of nothing, random noise in an already crowded day. She joked about being dramatic when she mentioned it to a friend. But the alignments kept appearing, and with each one, the unease in her chest deepened. Not painful, just undeniably present. A tug when out. She opened her inbox. A pull when she walked into the office. A steady pressure in the direction of something she couldn't name and didn't yet trust. Patterns began to emerge, faint but unmistakable. Like cracks in a curtain, letting a sliver of backstage light spill through, always pointing away from the life she'd spent so long trying to perfect. One Tuesday evening, after another long day of muted smiles and forced enthusiasm, Elena sat alone at her small kitchen table, the hum of the bakery's refrigerators drifting up through the floor. The familiar anxiety rose again, that shapeless tension she had been outrunning for weeks. This time, instead of distracting herself with her phone or opening her laptop just to check one more thing, she simply paused. She looked back over the week, the canceled contract, the missed trains, the repeating numbers, the fallen book, the strange heaviness every time she walked into the office, and noticed how every odd little moment seemed to lean in the same direction, just long enough to realize that nothing had actually been falling apart. Something had been rearranging itself, preparing her to loosen her grip. In that pause, in that held breath, between the life she knew and the one pressing quietly to be born, she finally heard it. The soft, persistent whisper that had been following her all along, waiting for the moment she was still enough to listen. It is a strange and slightly mischievous habit of life that it rarely explains itself in the moment. Instead, it scatters pieces across your days like a trail of breadcrumbs, each one insignificant on its own, yet unmistakably deliberate when seen together. Meaning, you discover, is shy. It steps forward slowly, only after you've lived enough of the pattern to recognize its shape. And so the second sign appears not as a revelation, but as a slow, dawning recognition that things, people, events, coincidences, are aligning in ways that defy randomness. You might catch it first in something subtle. A thought you were quietly wrestling with appears suddenly in a song lyric, or in the phrase a stranger speaks into their phone beside you. A symbol repeats itself, a number, a word, a small detail you dismissed the first time, and the second but not the third. Synchronicities begin to weave themselves into your days like threads of an unseen tapestry, and for a moment you pause. Not out of fear, but because the familiar world has shifted by a single degree, revealing the faint contour of something more intentional beneath it. It's never dramatic. Life doesn't throw fireworks just to get your attention. Instead, it prefers these gentle alignments, unlikely timing, mirrored thoughts, a feeling that something external is echoing what stirs quietly inside you. Most people try to explain it away, determined to avoid sounding mystical or irrational. But there comes a moment when the coincidences outnumber your skepticism. You begin to wonder if the universe is less like a machine and more like a conversation, one held in symbols instead of sentences. And yet, the beauty of this sign lies in its humility. Patterns don't demand belief. They simply ask to be noticed. They sit patiently at the edges of awareness, weaving themselves into your routine until you finally turn your head and realize you've been guided all along. The meaning doesn't arrive on your schedule. It blooms when you've grown quiet enough, receptive enough, honest enough to understand it. So you begin to ask yourself the questions that mark every turning point. Are these coincidences really chance? Why does everything suddenly feel connected? Why this? Why now? And the more you notice, the more the pattern reveals. As though life has been waiting for the exact moment you'd be ready to see what had always been unfolding behind the scenes. Long before the mind admits the truth, the body announces it, sometimes subtly, sometimes with the stubborn insistence of a quiet friend who can no longer keep your secrets for you. The third sign arrives not through thought, but sensation, a heaviness in the chest when you force yourself toward something that no longer fits, an unfamiliar burst of energy when you stumble unexpectedly into something aligned, the restlessness that creeps in when you stay too long in a place your spirit has already outgrown. Your body has its own way of knowing, a kind of ancient instinct that doesn't bother with logic or explanation. It reacts before you understand, and often before you're ready. A conversation ends and your shoulders tighten. A new opportunity appears, and your breath deepens. You sit across from someone and feel your stomach settle or twist, without any evidence beyond the simple honesty of your cells. And while the mind argues, negotiates, and rationalizes, the body keeps offering its quiet truths in the form of tension, warmth, fatigue, or sudden clarity. Most people ignore these messages. They medicate the exhaustion, dismiss the intuition as nerves, and chalk up physical discomfort to stress. It's easier, after all, to silence the messenger than to consider the possibility that your life wants to pivot. But the body is patient. It will whisper for as long as it can, and when that fails, it will raise its voice, not out of cruelty, but out of loyalty to the part of you that refuses to live dishonestly. If you look closely, you'll notice that the body never speaks in riddles. Its language is direct. This feels wrong. This feels right. This drains me. This restores me. It tells you the truth you're not ready to tell yourself. And if you've ever felt your body trying to warn you, through a tightening you couldn't explain, a calm that arrived out of nowhere, or that subtle lift in your chest when something finally aligned, feel free to comment your experience below. Someone out there might recognize their own unspoken sign in your story. Because once you begin to listen, really listen, you'll see that every physical sensation is part of the same conversation life has been trying to hold with you. A conversation not meant to alarm you, but to guide you gently toward the path you were always meant to follow. There comes a point in every life where the familiar begins to loosen its grip, though nothing on the surface looks different. You're still going through the same motions, speaking to the same people, holding the same routines, yet something subtle shifts underneath, the way a house settles at night with the softest groan of wood. And while most people assume this internal shift is a sign of imbalance or overwhelm, life itself has a different intention. It isn't testing you, though it may feel that way. It isn't holding something back to make you struggle. It is simply coordinating, moving pieces around behind the scenes in a choreography too complex for the anxious mind to comprehend. If you watch closely, you'll notice that the signs always appear at the exact moment your old identity begins to crack. Not break, just crack. A gentle fracture in the surface of who you've been, letting a little air in. There's a soft discomfort, a vague knowing, the sense that something you once held tightly no longer feels quite the same. And in that trembling space, life slips in its quiet messages, not to prompt fear, but to prepare you, because transformation is a subtle visitor. It prefers to send its calling card long before it steps through the door. This is why the signs feel timed so mysteriously, arriving before you're ready, but never earlier than necessary. They show up when you're stretched just enough to consider loosening your grip, but not so strained that you snap. Life is precise that way. Its nudges are gentle but persistent, arriving with the rhythm of breath. A small realization here, a coincidental encounter there, a conversation that finds you at the exact moment you've begun questioning the path beneath your feet. But the deeper truth, the one almost no one tells you, is that the signs come because you've already begun moving inwardly, even if the outward steps haven't happened yet. Life mirrors your quiet inner shifts long before you articulate them. The universe is not separate from you. It responds to the changes stirring in your chest, the ones you're only half aware of. And just when you begin to wonder whether all these nudges mean anything at all, life reveals the next part of the pattern, often through a story, a moment, or an encounter so strangely timed, you cannot help but feel the unmistakable pull of direction forming around you. There are seasons in life when a person looks steady enough from the outside, even as something inside them quietly shuts down. Jonas was living in one of those seasons. He worked as an operations analyst at a mid-sized tech company, a job that sounded respectable and felt increasingly hollow. His days blurred into each other, the same gray office, the same hum of fluorescent lights, the same spreadsheets stacked like bricks around his mind. He told himself this was what adulthood looked like: reliable, moderate, a little numb. But a subtle dullness had begun to coat everything. His mornings, his commute, even the small satisfactions he used to feel. Like dust collecting on glass, it didn't seem dangerous at first. Until one day he realized he could barely see through it. The unraveling didn't arrive with a dramatic breakdown. It started with the kind of small strains you only recognize in hindsight. A major project he'd spent months refining was canceled with a single late-night email. We're shifting priorities. A new hire was given a promotion Jonas had quietly assumed would be his. Performance reviews became vaguer, more cautious. Praise turned into areas for growth. None of it was catastrophic on its own. But each moment tapped lightly on a surface already under tension. Jonas responded the way many do, by working harder, staying later, tightening his grip on the very thing that was slipping away. Then the collapse came. Not as one loud moment, but as a string of soft, final facts. The company announced restructuring. There were charts, buzzwords, and forced smiles in a town hall meeting. A week later, Jonas sat in a small conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee while his manager read from an HR script about budget cuts and tough decisions. His role was eliminated. His badge stopped working by noon. By evening, his desk was emptied into a cardboard box. A mug, a plant, a few pens, and the framed quote he'd stopped believing in years ago. At home, the silence felt too big for one person. Confusion pressed against his chest like a weight he couldn't name. How had everything he'd built disappeared so quietly? And yet, in the hollow space that followed, something unexpected flickered. One rainy weekday, with no office to rush to, Jonas ducked into a small cafe he'd never noticed before. The air smelled of espresso and orange peel, and soft jazz played from a speaker tucked near a shelf of mismatched books. At the bar, a stranger sat with a notebook full of branching diagrams and crossed-out phrases. They started talking about coffee, about the weather, about how strange it feels when your life empties out faster than you can catch it. At one point, the stranger asked, almost casually, if you didn't have to go back to what you were doing, what kind of work would actually feel honest? The question landed with a clarity that startled him. Jonas heard himself say, I think I've always wanted to help people tell their stories, make sense of what they've been through. The stranger turned their notebook around. In the middle of the page was a messy heading, story coaching, narrative workshops. Branches spread out from it. 1.11 clients, group circles, talks, courses. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a door quietly swinging open. Later, Jonas would look back and realize that nothing had simply fallen apart. It had been rearranged. Losing his job created the empty space he needed to train as a narrative coach, to begin hosting small storytelling circles in that very cafe, helping others turn confusion into meaning. What once felt like failure became the exact pressure that pushed him onto a path that actually felt alive. And if you look closely at your own life, you may notice a moment like this. The turning point disguised as losing everything. The redirection disguised as collapse. The kind of sign that only reveals itself once you've stepped through the doorway it created. Awareness is not something people stumble into by accident. It isn't a lightning strike or a sudden upgrade in consciousness. It grows the way eyesight sharpens in a dimly lit room. Gradually, patiently, after you've stopped squinting long enough to let the shapes emerge on their own. Most spend their lives believing awareness is a talent reserved for mystics or sages, but in truth, it's a discipline. One that begins the moment you stop running from your own inner noise and let yourself stand still long enough to hear what lies beneath it. Every day, life offers countless opportunities to practice this seeing. A breath you rush through. A moment of irritation that flashes and disappears before you ask what stirred it. The way your body tightens when a certain person speaks. The way something inside you softens when you imagine a different path. None of these moments are dramatic, and that's precisely why most people miss them. Awareness requires noticing the small things. The slight tilt in your own mood. The fleeting discomfort. The inexplicable curiosity. And reading them as messages rather than static. Stillness doesn't come naturally to the modern mind. It fidgets, it speculates, it scrolls. But beneath all that movement, the present moment keeps knocking, endlessly patient, waiting for you to remember that clarity begins only where noise ends. Awareness is not about thinking more deeply. It's about sensing more honestly. When you pause long enough to truly attend to your surroundings, you begin to sense the subtle textures of life, how conversations leave an emotional aftertaste, how your intuition tugs at you like a child trying to get your attention, how the ordinary becomes illuminated once you stop barreling past it. And if reflections like this help you understand your path, you're welcome to subscribe, not out of obligation, but simply so the next whisper can find you when it's ready. Sometimes the right words, heard at the right moment, open a doorway you didn't realize you'd been standing in front of. Because the truth is, awareness isn't magic. It's presence. It's choosing to live with eyes that look beyond the surface, ears that listen between the lines, and a heart willing to be moved by the smallest, quietest signals. Once this skill awakens, even slightly, the world takes on a new clarity. And with that clarity comes something even more powerful, the ability to recognize the subtle shift that happens when you begin not just to look, but to listen. Which brings us to the next layer of the journey, the moment when listening stops being an idea and becomes a felt reality. Listening, truly listening, is nothing like the passive silence people imagine. It's an inner stillness, yes, but one alive with detail, like a forest at dawn, where every leaf, every breeze, every distant wing beat contributes to a deeper harmony. When a person begins to listen to life rather than merely hear it, something perceptible shifts inside them. Their breath slows, their attention widens. The world around them grows textured, almost tender, as if it has been waiting for this exact moment to reveal what it's been whispering for years. Listening feels at first like an unfamiliar quiet, not emptiness, more like space. The mind softens its grip, fear loosens its knot, and intuition steps forward from the shadows where it has been patiently observing. The thoughts don't disappear. They simply stop shouting. And in that softened mental landscape, you begin to sense what has always been beneath the noise: gentle nudges, subtle warnings, unexpected warmth, the faint magnetic pull towards something that feels right, even if you cannot yet explain why. People often imagine intuition to be dramatic, but it rarely is. It arrives as a gut feeling that doesn't bark, but hums. A sudden clarity that doesn't demand action, but invites it. A sense of peace that appears without reason, like a window opening on a day you didn't realize needed fresh air. When you listen closely, you realize intuition isn't mysterious. It's familiar. It's the voice you silenced long ago because it spoke too softly for a busy world. Of course, listening also changes your direction, sometimes subtly, sometimes decisively. You may find yourself reconsidering choices you once clung to, or discovering desires you never admitted you held. And as this happens, the fear that once felt heavy begins to unwind. Not vanish, unwind. Listening doesn't remove obstacles, it simply reveals which ones aren't really yours to carry. And if someone in your life is wandering through uncertainty, quietly overwhelmed, quietly searching, you might consider sharing this video with them. Sometimes a small offering of clarity arrives at just the right moment, and it can steady a person who's been trying to find their footing in the dark. Because when you truly listen, You begin to notice the gentle architecture of your path forming under your feet. And just beyond that realization lies the deepest sign of all, the one that arrives not through coincidence or discomfort, but through the subtle, unmistakable shift inside you when you finally stop resisting what life has been trying to show you. There comes a moment, subtle at first, then undeniable, when the struggle begins to dissolve. Not because the world suddenly becomes kind or because you finally gain answers, but because something inside you grows tired of clinging to the edge. This is the moment when the last sign appears. Not in the form of a coincidence, not in a dream, not in some grand revelation, but in the quiet softening of your own resistance, a loosening, a surrender, a release so gentle you almost miss it. It often arrives after a long stretch of wrestling with life, arguing with its timing, resisting its redirections, insisting on your own maps, even as they lead you in circles. But one day you wake up and realize the grip you kept around certainty has weakened. You're no longer fighting the shift you once feared. You feel the same uncertainty, but it no longer presses against your ribs with the same sharpness. It's as if the universe, patient as always, has been waiting for this exact moment, for you to stop pushing so hard against the current. Surrender has a reputation for being dramatic, a collapse, a breaking, a moment of epiphany. But in truth, it is quiet. It feels like exhaling after holding your breath without noticing. It feels like letting the world be what it is instead of what you demanded it to be. When you stop fighting, the fear does not vanish, but it becomes lighter, like a coat you can finally shrug off. And in that space beneath the fear, something else appears. A strange, tender clarity that has been trying to reach you through all the noise. Here lies the real sign, peace. Not the kind that promises safety or guarantees, but the peace that comes from no longer insisting that life unfold on your preferred schedule. You may not know what comes next, but you feel for the first time that you don't need to. There is a rhythm beneath the uncertainty, a rhythm you can finally sense, the way a dancer begins to feel the music before taking the next step. And this soft surrender opens the doorway to the final whisper, the one that doesn't push, demand, or warn, but invites. It is here in this quiet alignment that life begins to reveal what has been waiting on the other side of letting go. If you listen closely, you'll notice that the world has never stopped speaking to you. Every moment. Even the ones you dismissed, even the ones you resented, carried the faint shimmer of meaning, like sunlight brushing the surface of a river in passing. Only now, after all the unease, the patterns, the synchronicities, the redirections, the quiet awakenings and reluctant surrenders, are you able to hear what was woven through it all? The whisper arrives without ceremony. It doesn't arrive as instruction or prophecy. It arrives as recognition, the subtle but unmistakable understanding that your intuition was never separate from life at all. It was life, speaking in a language you had forgotten how to trust. When this recognition settles in, it feels like returning to a place you didn't realize you'd left. A place where the world around you and the world within you finally hum the same note. This whisper changes everything, not because it gives you answers, but because it dissolves the illusion that you ever walked alone. You begin to notice the intelligence tucked inside the smallest gestures of existence. How that coincidence nudged you toward a better path. How that closed door spared you from what wasn't meant for you. How that moment of exhaustion wasn't failure, but a message from your deeper self. How every silence you once feared now feels like a doorway into greater understanding. Life speaks in gentle patterns, in pauses, in misalignment, in unexpected ease, in the way your breath steadies, when you consider the choice that's meant for you. And now you can hear it. You can feel it as a steady warmth beneath the uncertainty, as a soft tug in the direction of what resonates, as a quiet knowing that does not shout because it does not need to. And if any part of this journey, any sign, any whisper, felt like it was meant for you, you're welcome to watch this video again whenever the world grows loud. Sometimes hearing something a second time reveals what you couldn't quite catch the first, not because it wasn't there, but because you've changed enough to hear it differently, because the whisper never leaves. It only waits for the moment when you're finally still enough, open enough, honest enough to hear the truth that was always there. Life has been speaking to you all along, and now you can hear its voice.